Good morning. I'm here to present a paper called The Identity Crisis of Sustainable Development. This is a paper that I'm co-authoring with Professor Beverlee Anderson here in the room. And we're reporting on the results of a study that we've conducted earlier this year. The whole premise of the paper, I think, fits very well with the theme of this conference, as well as the whole idea behind the World Association for Sustainable Development, because we feel we're at a place in the conceptualization of sustainable development where we need to, as we're looking forward, figure out what is behind this concept. There were several papers that were presented here that looked at some of these themes as well, including one yesterday that questioned some of the same things that we're questioning here. We're looking at it from a slightly different way. So our starting point is looking at how broad and wide sustainable development has become. There are, in this year alone, there are 119 conferences that have the theme sustainable development throughout the world, which is quite a sizable number. There are countless publications that use sustainable development as their main platform. The concept is used in everything from forestry to engineering to textile manufacturing. But is there a consensus around what sustainable development or sustainability actually mean? And that is really the thrust of this paper. That's where we start with. And we feel that it's really important that we don't necessarily define the concept in the same way, but that there is a shared understanding of what the dimensions are. Some of the challenges to sustainability, the idea of environment, the natural environment, and the idea of economic and social development really shouldn't be separated. And we're noticing in the literature as well as in practice that in many instances they are. The development paths of many industrialized countries are unsustainable, and there's enough literature out there that has already proven this. And also this affects the ability of all peoples to sustain human progress. So what is sustainable development? We rely on this definition. Sustainable development is the kind of development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. What this essentially is saying is that there are some essential needs of the world's poorest people that need to be met, and they aren't. In addition, it also relies on the idea that there are limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet both present and future needs. So these are two very basic assumptions behind our definition. The key aspects that there seems to be enough agreement around are environmental protection, economic growth, and social equity. And in many instances, these are seen as the triple bottom line measure of performance. But how did we come to the idea of an identity crisis? Why is there an identity crisis? Why is identity important? Primarily, identity is important behind any kind of concept to rally popular support. If an identity is unclear or confusing, it's more difficult for people to support them. And sustainable development has the benefit, but also the weight of being an integrative construct. What that means is we're bringing together themes from a lot of different disciplines, and we're trying to put them together under the umbrella of sustainable development. As a result, the operationalization has been fragmented. The way we measure the concept has often been quite distinct. So how do we gain convergence? We looked at, as we're looking at the identity of sustainable development, we've looked at various contexts. We looked at the academic context, we looked at the professional and trade context, and then we conducted a study with the general public. So in the academic context, we reviewed literature looking at sustainability in various disciplines. And we wanted to see where is the convergence around, what are the themes where people seem to have agreement on. And there seem to be two very clear concepts. There's the idea of survival and the idea of resource dependence. So sustainability or sustainable development is an issue of keeping life going, so the survival of the planet and species, but also there's the idea that we have limited resource, so we depend on these resources with everything that comes with it, the renewal, the reuse of these resources. But then there's a lot of divergence, and we saw a couple of studies that looked at all of the areas of divergence. We still do not have a clear, uncontested definition according to a couple of authors. Also, there's a lack of cohesiveness around what sustainable development means. What we decided to look at in this paper was the idea of a semantic disconnect. In other words, looking at the meaning behind some of the keywords used in the literature and how these keywords are not always agreed upon. So the idea of sustainable. The main question behind is, what is sustained? And depending on the disciplines that are being covered, we're seeing different levels of analysis. So for some people, what is sustained is the individual, such as in sociology and other disciplines. In business, what we're sustaining is an organization, and the organization within its environment. If we look in policy making, what is sustained is an even broader level of analysis. Where there seems to be some agreement within the natural environment and corporate responsibility literature is the idea that what is sustained is all of these systems within the planet. But still, we're quite a bit of a ways away from breaking down the silos. So these silos exist, and we're arguing in the paper that the main reason why they exist is because people have very different views on what has to be sustained. Then there's the idea of development. What is development? And there are many different conceptualizations behind what development actually means, whether it means the development of a nation, the development of a social group, or the development of an organization or an individual within that. So depending on the level of analysis, there may be disagreements on what is sustained and what is development. We further argue that we have to look at the importance of the relationship between humans and the natural environment. And in the paper we have a section where we're showing how the sustainability movement really came out of the biology sciences, and perhaps the level of analysis where we should be focusing more on is the idea of life rather than an organizational form. Why is meaning important? For very practical reasons. And we offer three here. There's a growing number of terms that are associated with sustainable development. Second, a growing number of measures and metrics. As more people are adopting the principles behind sustainable development, people are also looking at what are the best ways to measure. And we now have a plethora of measures and metrics associated with these terms. And from that, organizations are now reporting their sustainable development performance. So how do we compare these different reports? How do we compare what organizations and individuals are saying if we don't all agree on the same things? Then we also looked at the identity of sustainable development in trade and professional context. And earlier I mentioned that there are, for this year alone, 119 conferences that cover this topic. So we're very curious to see what are some of the specific issues that are being discussed. So we pulled out 119 conferences and we logged onto their websites and saw what are the various themes that are being looked at. So sustainable development is on the agenda of an increasingly larger number of trade groups and organizations. And what really that indicates is that practitioners and academics alike are looking for ways to integrate sustainable development within their disciplines. This table comes from the paper, and it shows the frequency of themes that appear at these various conferences. Most frequently, sustainable development comes as a general theme. But then what you're seeing below that is very clear disciplinary demarcations where sustainable development is pulled in. So conferences on energy, whether they discuss energy reduction or renewable energies or clean or alternative energies, they will bring in sustainable development themes. Conferences on business increasingly discuss sustainability. Urban planning or regional development conferences, engineering, academic, social responsibility, and so on. So you're seeing how all of these disciplinary conferences are bringing in more themes around sustainability. We also looked at the context of government and NGO. What we found, we're relying on a study that was done in New Zealand on a number of NGO and officials. And the study basically looked at how people conceptualize sustainable development based on the area that they're in. So there were three groups. One group was a group that was business-oriented. Another group was a group that was more social-oriented. And then the third group had individuals from both of these areas. What they noticed was that the group that was very business-oriented would associate sustainable development mostly with an economic logic, whereas the group that was more socially oriented was indeed looking at it from a triple bottom line perspective. And really the third group of government and NGO officials was able to look at sustainable development from a very broad a definition that we all identify with. Finally, we conducted a study on the understanding of sustainable development within the general public. And the reason we did this was because we wanted to see, we do have some definitions that are more or less accepted. We looked at how trades, we looked at how professionals, NGOs understand sustainable development, but how does the public understand sustainable development? Public is made up of consumers that buy products, that buy into sustainable industries. Public is made out of people that vote for politicians that may or may not have a sustainability agenda. What do they understand when these words are being brought up? So the study was a survey looking at how people define sustainable development. The sample was made up of 135 individuals. It was multi-generational. We had 60% female, 40% male. 86% of the respondents were born in the US, and the ages range from 20 to 83 years old. So we had quite a bit of a broad age span. The instrument was made up of open-ended and short answer items, and the analytical approach we used was a thematic content analysis. So we asked people to write down definitions. What do they understand by sustainable development? And then we content analyzed these definitions. Some of the results here. So we have the various themes that came out of the definitions, and we split our results by generations. We're really hoping to see if there are differences between how baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials conceptualize these various themes. And to a large extent, we did not see significant differences between generations. What you're seeing here is the frequency of themes. The most worrisome result, finding that we had in this study was the fact that most of our respondents consider sustainability or sustainable development to mean growth or business performance. And by that we don't mean environment or social responsibility. We really mean the idea of competitive advantage of a company. 45 out of our respondents, that is a third of our sample, consider sustainable development to not be associated with the environment or a society. They considered it to be primarily responsible of business development. So that was probably the most worrisome finding that we had. The idea that people are not conversant in the full working definition of sustainable development. The second most frequent theme was the idea of long-term time frame, and that is consistent with our understanding of sustainable development, the idea that it's something that happens over a long period of time. And then other themes that came up with significant frequency, the idea of resource scarcity or the need for renewable resources or the need to reduce or reuse and recycle. the idea of building something that is self-sufficient or durable, and the idea that sustainable development is associated with a natural environment. So as we're moving this study forward, we discuss what needs to happen to achieve some level of convergence.
When you addressed 135, how did you address the question to them? Did you address the question to them, what is sustainable development, or you tell them, does these things mean something for you in the sustainable development?
Right.
Because if you ask a question and people are not aware or have knowledge, they probably tell you some things that they disagree with their own answers tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But if the question was addressed, does these things mean to you anything in sustainable development, then probably their answer would be more direct to the point you want.
Right, it's true. We actually did not want to do that because we didn't want to guide the respondents in one direction or another. We wanted to see, in an open-ended environment, right, what is it that people most immediately associated with sustainable development. So we didn't want to offer any kind of controls to what people thought about the definition ahead of time.
They might consider the word development rather than sustainability.
Can we just delay the questions at the end?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes.
Okay. So we're concluding the paper by saying that sustainable development is going through an identity crisis. We don't feel that there is a convergent definition, and we furthermore don't feel that the way it's being applied today is not convergent. There is a lack of knowledge and understanding of accepted definition, and we notice that in our general public sample. So perhaps a way to achieve some level of convergence would be to educate. And to a large degree that is already going on through the curricular developments of a lot of universities. But not everybody attends university, so there might be some other ways to educate the general public. Also, from the perspective of disciplines and disciplinary silos, there is still some divergent thinking. So we feel there's an opportunity to further integrate disciplines through a forum like this conference, which is not only interdisciplinary but also interprofessional. There seems to also be a broken link between how the concept is being operationalized and measured. There are so many different measures, not all of them mean the same things, yet we often consider the word to mean the same thing, even though it relies on different metrics. There is a level of self-centered thinking around the idea of resources, and we again notice that in the general public, where sustainable development really meant what can you do for me, rather than what can we do for the world. The idea of worldwide public participation, we feel that there is a need for a clear and shared understanding. If we have to rely on the citizens of the world to achieve some level of sustainable development, people need to understand what that means, and that understanding needs to be shared. So we are taking this paper forward beyond what you see in the Outlook publication, and we're moving from the idea of an identity crisis to exploring the multiple identities of sustainable development. And so that might be the paper for next year.